Hi all, the World Cup is upon us, a very, very exciting knockout format tournament. It's being played in Baku, Azerbaijan. Baku was the birthplace of Garry Kasparov, by the way. So this World Cup format has 128 players, so it works with the knockout structure. So two will always be playing against each other until the final. In the 128 players, we have world-class players like Topalov, Nakamura, Caruana, Giri, Kramnik, Wesley So, Grischuk, Dindaren, Karyakin, Gelfand, Svidler, Ivanchuk, Wei E, who we've had a few games on the channel recently, Aronian, and many more. So let's have a look at Wei E as our first entry into this fantastic tournament. Now, Wei E in round 2 was playing against Yuri Vok, who had a fantastic game in round 1, which I'd also like to go over at some point. And it was in the French defence, and I think Wei E might have prepared for this game. Let's have a look. So Wei E playing white, e4, and Yuri Vok plays the French defence, d4, d5, knight c3, and we have the classical variation, not the winnower, which is bishop e4, but the classical, which invites white to close the centre. And Wei E did this, and we have f4. So white's establishing that pawn centre. It looks aggressive, but black has classic undermining operations. c5, knight f3, knight c6, very well trodden. White's trying to reinforce his centre and the dark squares in general, and black's just trying to undermine. And this is the theme actually for quite a while, this continual war in the centre. C takes d4, knight takes d4, bishop c5, challenging d4, queen d2, and this makes way for castling queenside. Very exciting setting when both sides castle on opposite wing. And now we have a6. Now this is quite popular, h4. There's about 348 games in live, but also this is quite popular. There's about 300, nearly 300. Queen f2, second most popular. Black takes on d4, takes b5. Standard stuff so far. And here, sometimes bishop d3 is played, but this is the main move, it seems, bishop e3. Okay, releasing that, the pressure on that forcing move all the time. I know it's releasing blockade, but it means the queen might be free to move at some point. So keeping an eye on d4 though, that d4 square. Now often b4 is played here, but this is another move, queen a5. We have king b1 and now b4 here. Knight e2, and there's a nice blockade again for the knight now. It's another advantage of moving the bishop, is that the knight can replace the blockade point. Nimzovich in my system favoured knights as the blockading piece. This is the pawn to blockade here. It's the only pawn which is one of the main pawns to watch out for in the centre for d4s, but it's under lock and key at the moment, the d4 square. Queen c7. Now knight d4 is actually routinely played. Well, I say routinely, there's a lot of games, well 14 here, and only a knight g3 which was played free. So knight d4 is probably what black was prepared for. As an example, the game might flow like this, and we got a game. It's meant to be about equal, but so this seems to be more direct. It's got direct ideas of knight h5. This is what was played, and then looking at g7, maybe following up with queen g3 to probe, to create some weaknesses if nothing else. So black played a5. So we have the attack on both sides of the board is on the way, but also a5 positioning might be interesting, exchanging off the light square bishop, because that is kind of labelled the bad bishop in inverted commas of the French defence. Knight h5. Now here, queen g3 is getting a bit of a worry, and it looks as though black's got quite a lot of pressure on the e5 point here and might want to defend laterally. So this next move seems to tick both boxes basically for king defence and central pressure f6. Not only that, it supports rook f7 if needed to defend g7 directly, and that's tested here in the first case with queen g3. So black has no time to set on at e5, the simple threat of mate in 1 here. Rook f7. So, does white want to take on f6? It means actually black's centre mobility might be getting quite dangerous. And also the bishop could be liberated potentially on this diagonal. And in Yuri Vogt's game in round 1, this diagonal was good for the bishop actually. He managed to get a bishop here. So he's quite aware of making use of his bad bishop. Now, this is a very interesting kind of what I call a trademark move actually now of Wei Yi. This bishop b5 was played here. It's a trademark move in this variation. There's a certain logic which I've talked about many times, that sometimes when you give up a light square bishop for a knight, you're increasing your dark square pressure. And that, I think that's really the case here. There's a dark square campaign that white is trying to get across this diagonal and these pressure points on dark squares. And to sacrifice basically the light square bishop as part of that is quite a logical thing to do. And sometimes you're often giving up the dark square bishop for a light square campaign. But here, bishop b5, and it looks like, is this pawn able to be taken? Well, black does play f takes, but after f takes, it's too dangerous to take this pawn with either knight. Let's see, let's rule out knight c takes e5. There's bishop d4 here, simple and strong bishop d4, but also rook f1 is immediately strong. But this combination of bishop d4 looking at g7 and rook f1 is really dangerous. So white is immediately threatening bishop takes d7 for bishop takes e5. So if black tries to protect his queen, so he's got the possibility of taking back without getting massacred. Here, rook here though, just trying to get rid of the defensive piece of g7. This is really dangerous. Example, bishop takes d7, bishop takes, drops e5, and knight takes. This position is too dangerous. Queen here is even stronger than taking on g7 immediately. And it's kind of over after bishop takes g7. It's really too dangerous. You see the effect of giving up the light square bishop literally on the dark squares leading to the path to the king here. On knight takes, it's too dangerous for knight c takes e5. There's a bishop d4. And knight d takes, there's bishop f4 this way with the bishop. For bishop takes c6 immediately threatened. If black tries to counterattack, then in this position, takes here, this is very strong. Not queen takes, but rook hf1. Again, trying to get rid of the defensive piece, the rook. And this position here, now, there's a trademark kind of resource for Wei Yi that we've seen in one of his other notable French defense games, bishop e8. And it really is good here. This is too dangerous. Something like this, and white's got an advantage like that. So it's a really great trademark move of Wei Yi in this particular variation, that it really seems that this pawn sack is pretty sound. In the game, queen takes, by the way, there's bishop takes c6, looking at the rook. So in the game, bishop a6, and yeah, white freely gives up the bishop now. It literally intensifies the pressure on dark squares. It's taken out one of the key knights, putting some pressure on e5. And now white's got a freer hand to attack g7, bishop h6. Black counterattacks here with rook c8. So this queen takes c2 check could be annoying. It could bounce back, in fact, to g6 potentially. It's protected. And now g6 does weaken the dark squares. Knight f4 immediately threatening. Knight takes g6 now. So dangerous. Black's in a precarious position here. Okay, and taking this pawn on e5 is asking for trouble usually. Either if it can be attacked with rook e1, or white might even play rook e1 and h4 at some point. It's too dangerous. Okay, so here actually king h8 was played, And we have h4 anyway. It is a dangerous position already for black. What is black wanting to do here? He plays actually knight c5. He ignores that pawn and just goes for a knight e4 instead. h5, knight e4. Yes, his king seems to be in the process of being shredded. After queen h4, white is simply threatening hg. This is not a great position to be in. So much for black's central pressure on e5. Yeah, the attention has shifted to black's king safety. G takes h5, queen takes h5, hitting the rook. Also, knight takes was pretty good here, just to go to f6 potentially. But queen takes is pretty good. Queen steps back. Black is in a really passive position here with minimal counterplay, it seems. White now plays rook h4. So reinforcing f4, but also this rook can come in like this potentially. We have now rook b7, queen g4, not just looking at g7, but now e6, and it's difficult for black to defend this. If black tries to sort of just passively defend this position with a move like rook c6, just this sort of move now threatens knight g6. For example, black could get splatted, knight g6. This is just a forced mate with the two rooks coming down. So this scenario, yeah, means actually black is prompted to give up the pawn, let e6 go as a lesser kind of evil move. Potentially. Queen g8. It's here after queen h3 that similar sort of ideas are emerging now. Well, h7's under pressure. But if white's going to treble, it's really dangerous. Black tries queen f7 here actually, and lets e6 go. Rook g8. Has black got sufficient counterplay? Not really. Knight d4 threatens things like e6. And although the bishop seems to be not doing anything there, it's this diagonal which is very interesting for this bishop. Black hasn't got a dark square bishop, so if this bishop can reroute somehow on this diagonal, it's really dangerous. Queen f2, looking at the knight. And here, a very clever response, because it's also, it seems to be a fork. Maybe this is what black had been counting on, this sort of counterplay on the g file. But it's squashed. The counterplay is actually squashed with this next move, rook g4. Protecting g2 and threatening the safety of black's king. Here, black's rook just moved away. If queen takes d4, then black gets it. Rook takes check is forcing mate actually. After rook f7, this is forcing mate. Rook f8, queen takes f8. Yeah, so this actually squashes black's play. If it was a pawn sack for this position, for this double attack, it's just been squashed. Rook g4. Whoops. Yeah. And also, on rook takes g4, queen takes, I think this just leaves the back row weak. There's queen c8 check here. So yeah, the bishop is kind of creating a mating net in some of these variations. So rook g4 is sufficient here. The rook just moves away. It's not good, because now the worst thing happens to black. Bishop e3 with tempo. The bishop is heading now for this diagonal. Queen f7. And now, unfortunately, again with tempo, it's a disaster, isn't it? To open up this diagonal with tempo is a dream come true. Because all the bishop needs is to come to d4 now. After queen f6, yeah, we see knight f3 of the bishop, threatening to come to d4. Black's helpless on these dark squares. It has been quite weak on the dark squares for some time. But now, with the threat of bishop d4, black resigned. It looks like a trademark kind of stylistic win from Wei Yi. The trademark move bishop b5 we've seen in an earlier game where he's battled in the classical line. And this is the culmination of white's dark square play. It seems, black from the outset in the opening was trying to hit d4. But yeah, it's really d4 and e5 the key central squares for much of the game. But at certain points, black's king safety comes into question. And here, it's not just the dark squares, it's black's king safety on that path, that dark square path. A beautifully logical game, and one which, it seems that knight g3 was a very nice idea then. When usually knight d4 is played, it keeps more tension in the position in some respects to go a knight to h5. In other respects, it looks a bit more crude and direct. But with this bishop b5 idea, I think it makes that recipe really much more effective, that recipe for success in this variation. It looks like a legitimate new attacking plan in this whole variation. So well done to Wei Yi on this first game in round 2. Okay, a very exciting tournament, and I hope to check out some more games with you soon. Comments or questions on YouTube. Thanks very much.